Welcome to another episode of the Impossible Life podcast. I'm your co-host, Nick Surface, and I'm sat across from a man whose first confirmed kill was a low-level boogeyman who made the mistake of wandering into the wrong closet when he was only 4 years old. That's right, friends, the former Navy SEAL, Garrett Unkelbach, a man who has been slaying giants since birth.
I had my first imaginary kill at 4 or 5 years old.
Yeah, dude, you took that boogeyman out.
And then my first real kill at 6.
Which is not a joke. Garrett shot his first deer. Your dad's very proud of that story.
He's super proud of that.
That you shot your first deer at 6. And I'm much older than 6 and still have yet to bag a deer. So, ouch. Anyways, Garrett, let's move on from that painful story. Today's episode.
I won't bring up any of the other sticking points.
Look, dude, people can listen
just
to it.
Acknowledge that they're there, and that's it.
We'll move on. We will move on. Anyways, speaking of moving on, that was a great example of communication there. And that is what we're covering today is communication.
Hey, before we go any further on, we didn't talk about, I didn't mention I wanted to do this, but I wanted to do this. Before we go any further on communication here, I want to talk about some communication that we've received.
Yes.
We don't do this very often, but I just wanted to acknowledge one of our listeners, Reagan Crane, who sent us a very nice email.
Yeah.
And Reagan, you and I don't know each other very well. I know your family very well. I know your father very well. Your sister and I grew up together, went to high school together. First, I just want to say, please consider me a friend. Reach out anytime. But I'm just so proud of you, the email that you sent, just the growth that you're going through, the way that you're working and leading on your soccer team. That's a private email that you sent us, but I just want to say, it's such a great example of what anybody can experience. Yeah. If they're willing to put in the work, if they decide to grow, if they'll have a growth mindset, and it's just one step at a time. Reagan, just over the last year and a half, has just had massive change in her life, and she's one of our younger listeners and sent in one of the most amazing emails we've received. So
it really was very impactful. For those that did not read the email, which is everyone except for the people sat at this table, let me give you a quick rundown. Reagan is a Division I soccer player. She is now a sophomore. She's finishing up her sophomore year. She finished up her sophomore year as one of the captains of the team, which if you don't know anything about that, sophomores don't get made captain of the team. That's like a junior, senior, typically a senior type thing. And what was amazing, the reason we're talking about her soccer team is because Reagan she went through in the email she sent us and listed all the episodes of The Impossible Life that she had utilized.
Yeah, we've implemented this on the team. We've implemented this on the team.
Changed the whole culture of the team. I mean, she was talking about everything from standards to self-assessment to feedback to positive attitudes and perspective. It was, like Garrett said, it was truthfully one of the more impressive emails we've ever received.
I couldn't not acknowledge it.
So. Yeah, it was incredible. So, Reagan, thank you for that incredible email. For anybody out there, it's like, why are they talking about this? I don't care about that email. Well, the point is that Reagan took massive action and has literally not only changed her own life, but is also changing the lives of all the people on her team and having a huge impact on others, which is what we're really all about on this podcast.
So thank you for that communication.
Yes. Well, speaking of communication, we are fortunate to have on this podcast, and hint, it's not the guy talking, a guy who got trained in some high-level communications, shall we say under duress. Garrett's job in the SEAL teams was a JTAC, which... I want to let you just step in here.
Well, I was a JTAC and a comms guy. As a JTAC, you have got so much communication going on all the time. We would call it the helmet fire, where, in one ear, because I had multiple radios. Every SEAL has at least one radio. I had multiple radios. I've got, my personal radio on one side of my body armor. I've got my other radio on the other side of my body that I'm using to talk to aircraft. And at any one point in time, I can have 4, 5, 6 different aircraft on station checking in, telling me, what bombs and ammunition they have, what altitude and location they're at, and I'm having to deconflict them, remember all their call signs, remember their locations, remember all the bombs and ammunition they have. And that's just in one ear. And then in my other ear, I could have my chief or the other squad leader talking to me. And then I'm also trying to face-to-face communicate and talk to my team and, not just stand there like a robot and try to listen to everything that's going on. You really kind of just learn how to let your brain hear it, not actively listen to it. It's almost like sometimes when multiple ears were going off at the same time, it's like I felt like my brain was recording it, and then like it would play what, everyone would stop talking, and then my brain would replay what one said and then replay what the other said. It
Isn't
was
that
like,
amazing?
yeah, you just you had to figure out how to do it. It was very difficult though, when like, because you'll try to, at first you try to like listen to left ear for a second, listen to right ear for a second, and bounce back and forth, and that doesn't work. I would kind of just try to listen to both at the same time, and then like my brain would replay them.
And the crazy thing is did we mention that he's out doing life-threatening stuff? It's not like that would be hard if you were just trying to drive a car.
Yeah, just sitting in your room with your eyes closed.
Yeah, let alone like, oh, there's some bad guys that we're going after.
But there were also times where, I had a pilot just trying to rattle off to me a bunch of information, and I would have to just put him on hold for a second, because when they do a full, like ideally when they're giving you like a full check-in, I'm going to pull out a notepad and write all this stuff down. That's ideal situation. But sometimes it's just not ideal. And you've got to figure out how to make it happen.
Right. So you were telling, the reason I wanted Garrett to share that is because we're going to go through some principles of communication. As always, we're going to talk about some things that maybe are bad not even maybe, some things that are bad communication, and give you some of the elements that are involved that I think I don't think people will be aware of. Others, I think it'll be a good reminder. But you got to communicate at a very high level.
I was forced to communicate, with the helmet fire. But ideally, it's not a good time to talk to someone when they're having a helmet fire. And experienced pilots could tell.
Right.
Like they could tell when guys on the ground, i.e. me, because one of the things we would do, I got to do some cool things as a JTAC where you go ride with the pilots in their jets, so you understand what it's like at 18,000 feet moving at 700 miles an hour. The ground doesn't look the same way it does to you.
Dude, which jet
on the
did
ground.
You ride in?
And then I rode in some of the trainers where there's a second seat.
Oh, nice. I didn't know
they
that.
take you up for rides so that you can understand what it's like, what it feels like and looks like for them. And then also you'll do the same thing with them. That not all of them, but some of these pilots, they'll come on the ground with you, and so they understand what it's like on the ground.
Yeah,
because they're used to their view and we're used to ours, and that's a lesson on perspective. But the experienced pilots, the ones who had been on the ground before, they could tell, like, just by the tone of my voice, like, hey, it's not a good time.
Right.
Or they'll abbreviate their check-in or things like that.
Yeah. Now, you were telling me about one specific time when you guys
you
had to check in at a certain time, right? Like you had a certain window for the time. Well,
so I did things, there was a lot of communication mess as a JTAC. There's also, my first platoon, I had the role of a comms guy, which is the one who's responsible for, just like every SEAL has a weapon, but there's only one sniper. Right, or there's only two snipers. Every SEAL has a radio, but there's one or two people that are designated as the comms guy. I fix the radios. I'm also the one who makes the radio communication back to HQ. And there was a time where we had just been, inserted on a mission. And, on every mission, you have these predefined communication windows, right? Like as soon as we get on the ground, I'm going to, send word back to HQ. Hey, we just landed in the helicopter. Like they want to track us. They want to know what's going on, and because also it's not just so they can like be big brother. They're also our support, right? If something happens, they're the one who sends more aircraft. They're the ones who sends the QRF, the quick reaction force, to come help us if there's a problem. So as soon as we land, comms are not working. I cannot check in. I can't tell them that we're all on the ground. And you have these predetermined comm windows, 15 minutes before or 15 minutes after the hour, that you're going to try and check in and speak to them. And there's also a predetermined amount of time that if you miss check-in windows to communicate with HQ for either 2 hours or 3 hours or 4 hours, and that's just based upon risk of the mission and conditions and all of that, that if you miss all of those check-in windows, that the mission is automatically aborted and the QRF is sent to come find you. It's assumed that you're in a seriously bad situation, right? That's how important communications are. You can't just like go out there and just do whatever you want and not communicate. So on this mission, we had not had comms the entire time we're on the ground, and we were coming up really close. Like meeting those comm windows is very important, right? Everyone, once we miss the first one, everyone's like a little stressed out about it.
Right.
And we're at the point where if I miss the next comm window, that we're going to move over into this portion where the mission is now aborted.
Now, why did you miss the first window?
The communication was just not working. I was trying to communicate. I was doing everything I could with satellite radio, and we just couldn't get connection to the satellite. The real reason was we were on the side of a mountain, and the mountain was impeding my angle to the satellite.
Oh, okay.
So the goal was not to climb over this mountain. We were just going around it to get to where we were going. But as we were patrolling along the side of it, and you also don't want to, climb up there to silhouette yourself and all of that. but I couldn't get a line of sight. There's a specific angle. I have my compass on me. I know how high in the air, how high above the horizon this satellite is. It's a geostationary satellite. I know where it is in space, and between me and where I know that satellite is a mountain. And so I can't get line of sight to it. I'm trying to bounce around it, and I can't get communication to it. So there came a point where I was like, I came over my personal radio to the team, and I said, we have to stop the patrol, right? Stop here. I have to make comms. And the only way that I could make comms at this point was to get to higher ground. I didn't want to. I had to climb this mountain, right? And it was like another 800 feet up at a like 45, 50-degree angle. It was very steep. Like, this was not a short climb. I said, halt the patrol. I need 30 minutes to go make comms, right? And everyone knew what I had to do. It was all kind of assumed, like, the guys know why the radio is not working, at least in this case for the satellite radio, that I didn't have line of sight. And so it's like, oh, well, Garrett's going to take the next 30 minutes to go climb a mountain. And I took a swim buddy with me, obviously, go climb a mountain and to make comms. And so I literally took me about 30 minutes to go 800 feet up this steep cliff to get up there and make comms over satellite. And then we continued with mission.
Yeah. Now, I wanted you to share that story. There's a lot of things just from my own learner mind that I think are fascinating. The fact that you guys have a window for check-in before a quick response force comes.
It's predetermined.
Yeah.
Right? Like, hey, we're going to – and, for those of us who are old enough to have lived in a world before cell phones, that used to be the way that people would live their lives, right? Yeah. You couldn't get a hold of anybody at a certain time, but you assumed like, hey, we'll meet here at this time.
Yes.
I will call you from a payphone at this time.
Right.
Right. And that's the way that people had to communicate. And it's funny today when you see people get into a situation without cell phones.
Oh, man.
They don't know what to do.
Yeah.
Right. Or like they're in another country. I've had this happen with people multiple times. Right. You're with all your friends. You're in another country. No one has cell phones. And people just take off. I'm like, hey, come back, knuckleheads.
Yeah.
Right. Before you leave, where will we see each other again?
Right.
Where will we, because when you walk away, I can't just send you a text, hey, let's meet for dinner. Hey, catch you back at the hotel, right? You have to have these predetermined communication windows.
Now, and that's what's interesting. So we have more comms than ever right now. I mean, you can get a hold
people's communication etiquette and communication skills are so lacking.
Correct.
Because they sub it out to technology.
Yeah, and that's exactly the point. That's why we want to go through this podcast on communication. Now,
I wish we had some facts about how much more the younger generations text than talk, because that's a good example of them.
Yeah, it is. That's why the term ghosting exists, because people are so used to digital communication that if it's time to have a hard face-to-face, they don't know what to do. Now, one person who does not suffer from that is my man Kanye West. Famously, a famous example of communication that was not well done. Kanye West interrupted Taylor Swift.
Very direct, though.
It was... Yeah, I'm sure you can appreciate the directness of it and honesty of his communication. I don't think anyone else in the world really did. That is obviously a very famous example of going in and not doing a great job of communicating. Did he say what he wanted to say? Yes. But as we're going to get to, he failed on pretty much every point.
I don't even remember what his point was. I just remember what he did.
He was upset because he felt like Taylor Swift's video was great, but Beyonce's video, I think it was Crazy in Love, was just so much better that it should have won. Which is pretty incredible that you're going to go up and...
I just remember, hold on a second, I'm going to let you finish.
Yeah, I'm going to let you finish. Yeah, exactly. I'm going to let you finish. Well, that's kind of you. But here's what I have to say. I mean, it's a bold move, Cotton. Let's see if it pays off for him. All right. So we're going to get into some of the principles of communication, and we're going to break down some of the parts. But the very first thing you have to understand, and this is where I think a lot of people go wrong straight away.
Communication, like comms, when you go to comm school and you learn about it, you realize that there's just a few very simple things that make communication happen.
Right.
And communication is one of the funny things about being a comms guy. There's other jobs like this. Like IT is like this. If you work in IT, it's like this. When it works right, nobody says thank you.
Yeah.
But when it's wrong, everyone is like, what is your problem?
Yeah.
Like they make it a personal issue.
Right.
Communication, like the communication job in the military is like that. And communication just in life is like that. When it's working, everyone just assumes that this is just the way that it's supposed to be, right? There's no thank yous for good communication. Yeah. But when comms are down, when comms are not working, it is a fire.
Right. And in this case, when we say comms are down, I think that elicits a technical aspect. We're not talking about that. We're saying when you do if your comms are down, in what Garrett said, it means that you've communicated poorly.
There's a lot of supernatural correlation here between the way, and because it's principle based, the way that, physical, mechanical, technical communication works versus person-to-person and relational and social communication works. And we're going to connect those two.
Yeah. Now, so let's start at the very beginning, G, the objective of communication, which this probably sounds obvious, but trust me, it's not, because a lot of people, when you think about how they communicate with you, or if you're being honest with yourself and you think about how you communicate with others, you miss this very first objective.
This is one of those instances where Webster's 1828 just hits it right on the head.
Masterful.
If you've never, if you listen to this podcast, which, and thank you to so many of you who listen to this every week, who are always with us. You guys are awesome. Thank you for growing along with us. And if you listen to this podcast, we quote Webster's 1828 all the time. But if you've been listening for a while and you've never looked at one, or I even would encourage you to buy one of the big physical copies, read through the preface where Noah Webster talks about the importance of language and how powerful it is. This is, we've lost some of that today, and we make words mean different things, or really, I think words, we diminish their value in the way that we use them. And that's why we have to return to the root source of them. And Noah Webster connects a lot of that to how important the Bible is for language. But anyways, this is an example of where the meaning of the word is so powerful.
Yeah, and I blame Gen Z for that. They want to do everything in memes, and everything is, it's gas.
We can't just blame Gen Z for everything.
Yes,
because we're the millennials who were blamed for everything by the generation.
Yeah, but now it's our turn, G. It's a circle of life. Just let it happen. Anyways, so the objective of communication, the definition by Noah Webster that Garrett and I were just waxing lyrical over, there was 6 of them. And the 6th definition was to take the hearer as a partner in sentiment, become we instead of I and you. And that is so masterful.
To take the hearer as a partner in sentiments.
Yes.
When it's to say partner in sentiments, there's empathy there.
Yes.
I'm going to understand your situation.
Right.
Which this connects back to one of the root lessons that I learned in the military about communication. And that's this, that sent doesn't mean received.
Right.
To understand that sent doesn't mean received. Means I am seeking to understand the recipient.
Right.
Just because I said it doesn't mean that you heard it.
Yes.
Right. And so where communication fails so often is because we think communication has occurred. When I send a message, that doesn't mean that you received the message. And so in this definition, to take the hearer as a partner in sentiments becomes we instead of I and you. What you're saying is I'm going to be a partner in sentiment with the person that I'm communicating with. I'm going to understand them. I'm going to understand their situation. And I'm not just going to blurt out at them, but I'm going to make sure that they heard me.
Yes. So you're moving from a place of this is what I want to communicate and they need to understand it to it's actually my job to make sure that we both end up at the same place in my communication. There's a great George Bernard Shaw quote.
Love this quote.
The single biggest problem in communication, the single biggest problem in communication is that it has taken place. Which is
the illusion that it has taken place.
Well, dang it. I screwed that up. The single biggest problem in communication is the illusion that it has taken place, which, you saw my poor communication there. but think about that. And that's exactly what we're trying to highlight. So you need to understand when you're going in as the communicator, and when we're saying communication, we're very much coming from the place of you being the person speaking. It is your job.
Yeah, all of us, just like all of us are leaders, all of us are, you lead yourself,
Every
right?
person.
Everyone is a leader on some level. Everyone is a communicator.
Right.
You get to communicate with the people around you. You get to communicate your ideas, your visions in the right way. You get to communicate your feelings to other people, right? You get to communicate to other people, but as the communicator, that implies responsibility. In the same way that, as the comms guy out in the field, I didn't have as big of a radio as HQ did. They got way more guys back there. They got more radios. They got more antenna power. But I have a responsibility to make sure that my message makes it back to HQ. That is the entire role of comm school is not, how to, there's one day on how to talk on the radio and radio etiquette and all of that. The 2-week training course on just the technology of the radio is how to make sure that you can always get your messages to where they're supposed to go, right? You have to be able to understand what is impeding your message from being received. And as a communicator, that is your role, right? Just because I send a message, right, doesn't make you a comms guy. A comms guy, and when I say comms guy, I'm talking about us as people, as great communicators. What makes you a great communicator is to understand the things that are impeding your message from being received.
That's so good, G. And that also leads perfectly to let's go into some of those things, G.
Yes.
And we classified those as filters. And what Garrett's saying, so in physical comms, he's talking about because you've sent it, it may, like in the example, the story you told us at the beginning, there may be a mountain blocking you, right?
Yep.
Typically, you're not going to be in a situation where you're talking to your wife and there's a mountain in the way.
But what's crazy is sometimes in life we're like in that situation where there's a mountain between us and the satellite, and we're like, man, what's this mountain's problem?
Yeah.
Right? Like, or why doesn't this satellite just move? Right? Why do I have to climb the mountain? Like we can have that. It sounds silly to say, like, why didn't the satellite just move? Why didn't the mountain just get out of my way? Like, doesn't the mountain know that I'm trying to send communications? That sounds silly, and it is that silly when we have the attitude that people won't move to hear us.
Correct.
Right? As the sender, as the communicator, it is our job to resolve anything that's impeding our message from being received. It's not the recipient's job to get to a place where they can hear us.
Very good. I hope y'all caught that. So let's give a few examples of filters, Gina. And what you're basically saying there is the way you say and mean something isn't necessarily the way that the person hears and understands it, because we all have these filters and things that are going on in our head.
Literally, there's, in just on the physical side, and just go back to radio, because a lot of these things connect, and there's so many different types of things. There's everything from encryption being bad, right? Like that's a complicated one, or we're just not on the same frequency. Like we're supposed to be on the same frequency, but we're not. It doesn't matter. We can have, our radios can have line of sight, but if we're not on the same frequency, it's not going to work. There's even crazy things like solar flares. Like literally, it was kind of a joke. Like when we couldn't figure out what was wrong with the radios, we would just say solar flares. Because this is like a legitimate thing that if there is a solar flare, if you don't know what that is, just Google it, read the Wikipedia page on solar flares. It's cool. When there's a solar flare, like it jacks up radio signals, and you can be doing everything right. And then the solar flares have jacked you up, and there really is no remediation for that other than, it's like, okay, revert to hand and arm signals because.
Sweet. Yeah. Well, thank God we don't have that.
But I said to say, just like in the physical realm, there's all these different types of things that can impede your radio communications. As we communicate as people, socially, relationally, there's a lot of different types of problems. But if we just understand how they work and we know what to do to fix them, we can get back to having great comms.
Yeah. So our filters are in 3 different categories. And number 1 filter was the objective, which we've actually already covered. If you're going in with the wrong understanding of the objective of communication, you're going to be missing it straight away. Number 2, we have these, they're called awareness filters. The first one that we said was mood. So you've talked about how if you're angry, it changes what you see, right?
Yep.
So it's the same thing. It's going to change what you hear. If you're getting ready to communicate with somebody and you are completely missing the boat of what they're experiencing, what state they're in, they could be livid. They could have had something horrible happen. It doesn't matter how perfect you say things. It's not going to work.
Yeah. There are, my father used to say, you'll regret everything that you say in anger, right? There's certain circumstances that communication is just always going to be bad, and there's nothing you can do about it except wait until the right time to fix it. In radio communications, like sending messages over the water is actually really great. Like water bounces radio signal. So where if a radio can normally talk 2 miles, if I'm out on a ship talking back to the beach, I might be able to talk 3 or 4.
Okay.
Right? Like radio, water will improve signals. Versus if you're on a ship, like my buddies can be, 50 meters away from me, but if they're, if I got a couple steel doors between me and them, there's nothing I can do to resolve that.
Right.
There's things that'll amplify your signal. There's things that will diminish your signal. And emotions and feelings can, like, there's emotions that can amplify your communication, that can connect people into you, make them listen to you in a compelling way, right? The right types of feelings and emotions. But also there's the wrong ones of getting angry and yelling and screaming that'll make sure that no one can hear you even if they're right in front of you.
Yeah. And that kind of goes perfectly along to the next filter, which is timing. And that sounds really obvious, but there's definitely, it's definitely something that needs to be considered, because you can once again say all the right things. Maybe the person's in a great mood, but if they're hyper focused because the first hour of their day is whenever they set everything up and they're locked in on something very analytical, for example, or they're deep into work, it's not going to work. Same thing. End of the day might not be the greatest time to communicate. You need to really be aware.
Those people that, like, when they get on the phone, like they might as well be in outer space.
I do. That's you.
They're locked in, they're focused. And you could go up to those people and you could tell them, like, hey, you just won the lottery, or hey, can I give you $1,000, or like all kinds of things that you think would elicit someone's attention. and they're not there. They are absent.
Yeah. I've seen this once or twice. G has a very high focus. I don't know if that's a correct way to say that, but you are,
Well,
when you're locked in, you're locked in.
I also have just like a let me say this a nice way. I guess this is a nice way. I have like a shield for nonsense of like sometimes when people are just like being silly or, communicating things that are not aligned with the objective, I know how to just like cancel that out.
Mm-hmm. Anyways, so our next filter is, I put this, I'm not even going to bite anymore, man. I classified our next filter as...
We're growing.
Well, I am. Yeah. The next filter, I've classified it as experiences. But the reason I want this is a big one, and I want to.
Did you have anything to say on timing?
No, you very much elaborated exactly where I wanted to. So thank you. Where to go? But I put this as experiences, and what I mean by this is the meanings and the experiences that we've had in our life that help us to assign a representation to things. And here, I'm going to give you an example because that may sound confusing. So as you may know, if you listen to this podcast, I'm married to a wonderful English woman who I love madly. I actually went over to England for Bible college way back in the day as a young 21-year-old go-getter.
As a lad.
As a young wee lad. I was like, all right, lads. So I went over to England at 21 years old with just as, I'm not even going to say American, I'm going to say as Southern Californian as you can be.
Man.
So just not culturally aware of anything.
That's a culture clash right there.
Right, but culture is a great place where we get to see different meanings, and this is why I wanted to highlight this for people. So I was walking around in England for my first 2 weeks, and it took me a few times to figure this out. And people would walk up to me and be like, "You all right?" And I stopped and I was like, "Yeah, do I look sick or like do I look wrong?" They're like, "No, not at all. You look good. Don't worry." I was like, "Okay." And I was really confused. I was like, what are you, why is everybody asking me? Like, I must have something like, I don't know if my facial expressions are off. I was super confused.
Yeah.
And then, you're funny. Around long enough to realize what they're saying. You all right? Like, that's how they're saying, hey, how are you?
Yeah.
Like, and similarly.
But it means so much different here in the States. Yeah. You all right is like, you're really like, you're concerned.
Yeah. Like, hey, are you all right? Like, oh, dude, I just,
that's what you ask somebody when they just get, crushed on a bicycle.
Right. Yes, exactly.
Right?
Whereas there's like, you all right? Yeah, all right, mate. That's how they would say.
Just put that in the opposite context. Like you just watched a guy get, on a bicycle get hit by a car and you went up to him like, how are you?
Yeah, exactly. That was the confusion. But that's a funny example, but this happens all the time where we say something and because it means a certain thing to us, we assume that it means the same thing to the other person, and it's way, way different. The example I gave is a funny one. Counterpoint, if you do go to England and you want to mess with them back when they're asking you all right, just say, hey, what's up? They don't know how to respond. They're like, yeah, good. No, I'm not asking you how you are. I just want to say what's up. Like, oh, nothing. I had to like teach English people how to respond to that. That was fun for me. Anyways, but that
like the common response to what's up is like, yeah, what's up?
Yeah, nothing. What's up with you? Nothing. Yeah, exactly. There you go. For our English listeners, you just learned a lot about American culture. You're welcome. Thinking about my friend James over there who listens to us regularly. Hi, James. So that's a great example. Yeah, there you go. That's a great example of having a different meaning attached. And it's just important. That's a funny example, but it's important to know that this happens all the time. There are more filters, but the last one we want to highlight as one of the big ones is context. And I'm going to give you an example of this because this will seem obvious, but people do this quite regularly. So my wife is wonderful and will watch shows that I don't necessarily always have an interest in. She likes to watch baking shows and, sometimes just some super girly stuff that I'm just like, hey, I love you, but I'm going to read a book or,
I'm out on this one.
Yeah, I'm going to watch sports or whatever. Sometimes we will do that. It's not a common thing, but it does happen. Well, sometimes we'll be sat there and she'll just say something to me as if I've been watching the episode. And while I understand every word that she said, because I have no context for what she just said, I'm literally just dumbfounded. I'm like, babe, what are you talking about? I have no clue what you're talking about.
The opposite of that is, when you have people that you have, and, you with Rian as well, when you have people that you have so much relationship with, you also have so much contextual depth.
Yes.
That like it's so easy for you to communicate. That's so easy for you to have connection.
Yeah. And when you have shared connection like that, you have more context. So like you said, it does make it easy. The flip side is for those that you are just meeting for the first time where you have no context and no rapport with, and that's why if you talk to a good salesperson, they don't launch in with anything to do with business until they've gotten a lot of connections, a lot of similarities and mutual interests established so that they can have that context and that warmth with the person that they're going to try to sell to.
One of the things we probably won't even get deep into today, but just like the power of context, and context can amplify communication,
big
or
time.
it can diminish communication. And the SEAL teams, we have so much shared history through training, so much contextual knowledge of each other, that we're able to communicate so much non-verbally, right? Like the reason SEAL teams work so well together is so much training together that we don't have to talk to communicate to each other.
Yeah.
If we're like doing close quarters clearance and I just walk up to a hallway and stop and point my barrel in a certain way, like I've communicated what it would take an untrained individual, it would take them multiple sentences to say. Like I'm giving so much information and I didn't even say anything.
Right.
Just by the way that like I'm pointing my body or pointing my barrel or where I stopped or didn't stop, everything has so much meaning to it. And there's power in nonverbal communication, right? Which just comes from that context of training together, being able to operate and communicate well as a team. This applies very much to athletes.
Yeah.
Right. Like if you see your teammate running down running in the opposite direction on the field, I don't need to know where the ball's at.
Right.
I do need to know where the ball's at, but I don't need to know where the ball's at to know that I need to be moving back in
Correct.
the other direction.
Yeah.
Right. There's so much communication that can happen non-verbally when you've trained together.
Yeah. And context could probably have fallen in with experiences, but I think it's worth separating out, which is why we did, because it really does provide a meaning to what's being communicated based on the context. Sometimes run can be, oh, this is fun. Whereas other times run can be, this is a life or death emergency, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So last filter is the approach filter. And this is where my man Kanye West gives us a great example of the wrong approach. If your approach to communication is, I just need to get this out, I'm not sure any successful, well-ending conversation has ever started with, I just have to say this to you, right? Like that is not the way to get it.
Extinguisher.
Exactly. But so here's the focus, and we talked about this with objective. This ties in perfectly to objective. When you're going into a communication, is your focus on you and on yourself and the things that you need to communicate and you need to say, or is it on the other person? Because if it's on the other person, I'm going to go ahead and say that you're going to have a lot better chance of success. So approach comes down to where your focus is. Is it on you or is it on them? So
just like as the communicator, it is upon you to make sure that your message is getting received. It's not upon them to get in a place to hear your message.
Right. Yeah, exactly. So we're going to go into this. We put together a little, mnemonic device, G.
Yeah.
PACE your way to communication is the Impossible Life mnemonic device.
Yeah, this is how to measure and improve the quality of your communication.
Right. And we've given you a template that you can use when you're going into communication to truly have better outcomes and be more effective communicator. So little thing about execution, little side note here, something that people might find interesting. Do you remember that movie Hitch? Back in the day? What a great movie, man.
Great movie.
I remember it was the first time I heard this, and I think his percentages were actually off. I have recently done some training, so I know that this is accurate because this came from a psychologist.
Got you all certified?
Well, not yet. I got to do a lot of training to get my NLP certification, but it is in process.
Okay.
Anyways, so when you're communicating, this is interesting. Listen up. 55% of what you communicate is through your body language. Pretty high. 38% is through the tone and volume. And only 7% is the actual words you say. Now, like I said, I heard that for the first time in Hitch, and I was like, dude, I'm going to get all the chicks. Believe it or not, it didn't work. But at the time, I was very inspired. But think about that. 55% body language, 38%
people who
tone.
are really analytical can get hung up on that.
Yes.
Like, but how? How is it that only 7% is the words that you say? Because to a very analytical person, it's like, that's all that you said.
Yeah.
Right? The point is, it's all, 100% of that is all your communication, right? And that other 93%, like as far as these are the tools at your disposal to make your message well heard or misunderstood.
Yes.
Right? 93% of it is not the words. That 93% enhances or takes away from that 7% of the words.
Very good.
Right? Like you can say, like people have experienced this so often in their life, right? It's not what you said, it's how you said it.
Right.
Or I love what John Maxwell says, people will forget what you said. They'll never forget the way that you made them feel. So much of that is communicated through your tone, through your expression, through your body language. You can say the right words and say them in the wrong way and communicate the wrong message.
Yeah, and for those that may not believe that, next time you ask somebody what they want from Starbucks via text, just leave caps lock on and see if you get a different response. Seriously, you're right. I mean, that proves
Yeah.
it. That is literally just words, but we know what those mean. So, a little interesting side note. Okay, so the P in PACE, G, stands for permission.
Yeah.
And this means that you're getting permission from the other person that you're communicating with. Because remember, your objective is to take the here as a partner in sentiment and become we instead of I and you. So if I'm coming to Garrett to talk about something, I'm going to say, hey, Garrett, I wanted to speak to you about something. Can we talk about it now?
And permission can happen. There's like when you have relationship with someone, sometimes permission is just like eye contact.
Right.
Like, but
Yes.
there has to be like the beginning of the conversation. And the beginning of the conversation is not always the beginning of the message.
Right.
The beginning of the conversation is like you addressing each other, getting in, and so that can be eye contact, or it can like in a very professional setting, or maybe you have a difficult message to communicate. I'm going to gently walk into this situation and get permission, especially if it's like giving difficult feedback to somebody, like we mentioned earlier. Like, hey, I just need to tell I need to tell you how I feel, right? Making the message about you, or getting permission, like, hey, do you mind if I give you some feedback right now?
Right.
And you have to there is kind of like a flow chart to this, right? You have to.
He loves the flow charts. You do.
I don't know. I guess I just think that way. But people, if someone doesn't give you permission, don't proceed.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And so I'm glad you said that, because we are going to talk about, it's not like we're going to give you one way, and if everything goes right, then you'll be great. But if anything doesn't go the way we just said, you're screwed. It's like if someone says no, what's the correct and appropriate response? Okay, no problem. When can we? Like set a time.
Then if that happens, then look at the disturbances, the filters we talked about earlier. Oh, is it the wrong time?
Right.
Did something happen to them? Is there context that I'm missing?
Right.
Yeah,
exactly.
all of those possible scenarios.
Yeah, so that's how you're going to get yourself through the filters.
But we got permission. Now that we got permission, what's next?
The next thing is alignment. And what we mean by alignment, remember we said it's that you become we instead of I and you. One of the first things that you have to do is make sure the person knows why you're there to talk, like what you're going to talk about.
Understanding the objective.
Right.
It's like this is like the subject line of the email.
Yes. Oh man, now you're speaking my language, dude. I love that. So if
I don't want to say I hate it because it doesn't bother me that much, but it's like disappointing to me when people just like don't take advantage of how powerful the subject line can be. Right? Like introduce people to what it is that you want to talk to them about.
So I'm going to go a little digital marketing nerd here. Number 2 most impactful reason as to getting your emails open is your subject line. The number 1 is who's sending it. Because obviously if mom sends you an email that's like, check out this great deal, you might open it up. Whereas if like, Bob at whatever that you've never heard of, you're not going to open it. But number 2 is subject line. Really, really important. Anyways, back to what you're saying. So getting alignment in your conversation would be like me going to Garrett and saying, hey, Garrett, I really want to talk to you about podcast guests, right? That would be me introducing the subject and the objective of our communication. Now,
or without any context, if you just came to me and started like rambling off about some guy that we need to have on the podcast.
Yes. Hey, Garrett, I found this guy. He's really into CBT. He's amazing, and I just think we need to talk. I think it'd be great to have this guy on. You're kind of like, whoa. So if you have not done a great job.
Yeah, or even just take that a step further in the wrong direction. You're like, I already sent him an email.
Right. Yeah. I might want to pull that one back. But think about those 2 examples that we just gave where, why am I always the negative example, first of all? Okay, we need to talk about this off air. But in those examples I gave Garrett, I came at him either from a very high level, hey, let's talk about podcast guests. Okay. And then the other one, I was already in the weeds where I'm like talking about this guy and I'm already 6 steps down the road. You don't have alignment until
by the way, just communication pro tip. While I want to go one step further back than just trying to introduce, hey, can we talk about podcast guests?
Right.
This is a communication pro tip. Understand this concept. And if you want to communicate your ideas very effectively, more than just talk about like hey, I want to talk about podcast guests, talk about the ideas, give some of the vision before you even introduce the topic. This is one of the major keys here. Is we don't have a DJ call. That's probably
the best.
That's probably a good thing.
Probably.
This is one of the.
There you go.
That's appropriate.
Yeah.
This is one of the major keys to inception, right? To giving your ideas to someone else and having them think that it's their ideas, is that you introduce the idea, not the technique, not the specific topic, not the what, but this is what could be, right? You allow them to what if about your idea before you even introduce what the topic is.
If you go back a few weeks, I'm giving Garrett a weird look because he's big on this inception thing, and he told me that he used Inception on Lindsay for their whole wedding proposal. We shared that story on air, so you can go back and listen to it a few weeks ago. But that was kind of interesting insight. But if you have come in like I did and you've tried to get alignment to communicate to the other person what you're going to talk about and they're confused, you need to quickly realize, have I come in too detailed and not given them enough context? Or am I so broad that this could go in 26 different directions? You do not have alignment until the other person understands exactly what you are there to communicate and what you're hoping to achieve from the communication.
On very difficult communication topics, right? Alignment can take a long time.
Correct.
Right. This maybe that you may have multiple conversations just getting on the alignment topic.
Yeah, I'm glad you said
right.
that.
Or, like if me and Nick are going out to eat, the alignment conversation could be 30 seconds.
Right.
For some people and their spouse, that can be a 30-minute conversation.
Yeah, seriously. No, it's a good point. I'm glad you brought that up because and this is really, really important. I think this is where a lot of people go wrong is that the other person doesn't know what they're hoping to achieve. And once again, this is where filters and context can come in and you get your wires crossed. One person thinks you're trying to accomplish A and the other person thinks you're trying to accomplish something completely different.
Think about like in the way that an email works, right? Like there's permissions for it to just show up in your inbox, right? And then you look at a subject line and you click on it. What if you're just like on your computer and an email just like pops up on your screen with a body? Like all the text in there. Like weird. You'd feel like assaulted. You'd feel taken advantage of. Sometimes that can be how communication is when you just like throw your message at people.
Yeah, that's good, G. All right, so you've got permission. You've now got alignment. And so confirmation. I've now communicated what I wanted to communicate with Garrett in this case. And this is the key sentence. Tell me what you heard.
Permission and alignment are pre-message.
Yes.
Confirmation and engagement are post-message. Once you get alignment, you introduce the message. Now, confirmation and engagement, like understand that the message is in between those two.
Right. So now I've gone to confirmation and I'm saying, okay, G.
You've communicated your message.
Yes. Tell me what you heard.
Yeah.
Because what I'm listening for is to make sure that when you speak back to me, we've both arrived at the same endpoint. And this is obviously a massive one. You may, if you're hearing something different back, once again, remember the objective of your communication. You're going to have to find different ways to communicate.
Yeah, when you don't hear back what your message was, when you ask someone, you've talked, you're working on a difficult subject. Hey, now can you say that back to me or say it in your own words? Or, hey, tell me what you heard. I just want to make sure that we're on the same page. And they say it back to you. And what they tell you is not the message that you said. Don't assault them for that.
Right.
Be like, what's wrong with, why didn't you hear what I said?
Right.
Right. You have to, your job as the communicator, right? Doesn't matter. Maybe someone is thick-headed. Maybe someone is having a difficult time. Well, you've chosen to communicate your message to this person, right? And for whatever reason, you guys are working together in this moment. It is your job as the communicator to get to the right place. Maybe you're going to have to climb the mountain to send this message. Why is this mountain here? Well, if you don't want to be a communicator, then don't be one.
Yeah.
Right. But if you want to communicate, if you don't care about being right, if you don't care about why is this mountain here, if you just care about being a great communicator, sometimes you're going to have to climb that mountain. And so understand when people are not understanding you, it is your job to fix it.
It's good, G. Yeah. Very last thing. So now we've communicated, we've got confirmation that what they heard is what we said, is what we meant to say. And now we've got engagement. So was the objective accomplished? Have the actions changed as a result of the conversation? And if not, because this is a little bit further down the line, you got to seek to understand first, right?
Let me give like a practical example of this.
Please do.
It's like, okay, so we just finished our mission, right? We're ready to exfil, right? And
what's exfil for those of us who didn't serve?
Exfiltrate, to leave, we're going home.
Great.
RTB, return to base.
Thank you.
Right? And so we're on target and it's now time to call in the helicopters. I'm going to send the code word over comms to them like, hey, come get us. Right. And the helicopter pilots, they communicate it back to me like, hey, we understood your message. Okay, great. We're coming to get you guys. And then 10 minutes later, like I know these guys are 5 minutes off station, right? They're just over, they're hovering around in the next valley. And 10 minutes later, there's still no helicopters. I'm like, guys, I know you said that you were coming, but I know where you are and you should be here by now. What's going on? Right. And so that's when I would communicate to them like, hey, give me your status. Right. Because we didn't get engagement. Like we talked about this beforehand, from the time that I call for you, it should take you, 4.5 minutes to get here. And it's been past that time and I don't even hear any helicopters. What's going on?
Right.
Right. So there's lack of engagement there. There was effective communication, but not we didn't have engagement after the communication, right? That's an example of engagement.
Yeah.
Right. You can have communication with your spouse. You can have communication with your children, right? They're like, yep, got it. Understood, Pops. I'm going to go make it happen. Nothing happens, right? And then we need to come back to engagement. And the same way, like when we struggle on confirmation, we're like, hey, what's going on, right? You need to also seek to understand on engagement, because sometimes people can say it back to you and they repeated what you said, but that doesn't mean that they understood it necessarily.
Yeah, that's true.
Or things have changed, right? Like in that example, when the helicopters aren't there, it's not because those dudes just forgot. Right. They didn't feel like it.
Yeah.
Obviously something has happened, and I'm asking for status so that I can understand as well.
Yeah. And you know what the great thing about that
and here's why.
Yeah.
Because the goal is not to shut down communication.
Yeah.
Right. If I ask these like helicopter pilots, like, what's wrong with you guys? Why aren't you here? Right. They're going to just ignore me until they fix their problem and get back to me.
Right.
Right. But if I'm seeking to understand, then they'll communicate back to me, and maybe I can help solve the problem or at least understand what's going on. Right. When you shut people down for lack of engagement, you're also closing down future communication.
Yeah, that's so good. And that question or that directive of seek to understand before being understood, what does that do? Where's the focus, G? Not on yourself.
So, yeah.
And that was one of the keys to success. Major keys.
I had a great leader in the SEAL teams, and he, to this day, he's still one of the best examples I've ever met of seek to understand. He was a great communicator, and then guys would just be knuckleheads and not do what they were supposed to do. And I'd seen him even do this with people, and I'm like, he's got to know. He's got to know that they were just being disobedient.
Yeah.
But he would still genuinely ask, like, help me understand why you did this.
Right.
Right. And he had such great communication with people because of that. I really learned this quality of seek to understand from him, because he could always talk with people. He never shut it down. And then he would still, they would, a lot of times they would confess, like, yeah, I was just being an idiot. And he'd, sometimes he would have to discipline them for that. But he got a different reaction out of people instead of just assuming that they were being an idiot. Yeah. Like, he let them tell them themselves. Right. And it changed their future communication and their future relationship because of that.
I use that with my kids. So just to repeat our communication framework: pace, get permission, get alignment, make sure you're on the same objectives and you're clear about what you're looking to accomplish, get confirmation, tell me what you heard, and then the follow-up step is the engagement. If you're not seeing that the objective's been accomplished, if the actions haven't changed, and go back, seek to understand first before being understood.
Remember that sent does not mean received.
Yes.
And the greatest problem in communication is the illusion that it has taken place.
Good. All right, so your challenge for the week: where do you fall short? We gave 3 things to watch out for in earlier in the episode, and it was around approach, awareness, or objective. Are you approaching focused on yourself and what you have to say? That could be your problem. Is your awareness down? Are you ignoring
You don't
moods?
understand the filters, right?
Yes.
Like, comms isn't working, and I don't know how to fix it.
Correct. Yeah, you could be ignoring mood, timing. You could be ignoring the meanings.
I think this is where a lot of people struggle in communication, is the awareness portion.
Right.
And there's education that you can get to help improve you in that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, seek further education. There's a great one. Or is it the objective? Is your objective not clear even to yourself, and yet you're taking it out to go communicate with somebody?
Sometimes we think our objectives are different than just us satisfying our emotions, right? And so you should always have a clear, especially if it's going to be a difficult communication, you should have a clearly stated objective for your communication, not necessarily to say it to them, but to say it to yourself, so you know, this is what my goal is in this communication. My goal is that by the end of this conversation, the person I'm speaking with understands that they fell short in this area. My goal by the end of this conversation is that this person understands this is what the requirements are and you didn't meet them, right? Like, whenever you have a difficult conversation to have, you need to understand what the objective is. Not that the objective should not be that you feel my frustration.
Right. Yeah. Good. Well done, Jay. All right. I love that all your examples were very negative, difficult conversations. For once, it's just like, my objective is to tell somebody how great they are.
That's usually not an area that you fall short in communication.
Okay. Well said. Anyways, we'll see you guys again soon.